to this morning's town hall meeting. We're going to be talking about the bookcase project, Quo Vadis, which I think literally means where are we going? I believe there's also a biblical story which may or may not be appropriate, but my name is Rick. I'm the new editor-in-chief of the bookcase project, and in particular, thank you very much. Dave, what did I say about applause? I don't want any more. Thank you very much. I'm going to very briefly tell you who we are and what we've done. The main reason I'm here is to offer an opportunity to the INCOSE working groups to help us with the Quo Vadis bit. So, and in the spirit of town hall meeting, I will try and get down to the meeting bit and interact with all of you as much as we can. I know this never works, but if you would consider moving forward so we can all talk to each other, see, nobody ever does, that would be great. Okay, so, good man. A couple of people have asked me what the difference is between bookcase and CBOC. You can see it there on the screen. Bookcase was the name of the project, body of knowledge and curriculum advancement to advanced systems engineering. So the bookcase project was looking at understanding and providing a guide to the body of knowledge in systems engineering and creating reference curriculum products to help us use that guide to improve the professional practice of systems engineering. And the first curriculum product we've produced is a graduate reference curriculum, and there's talk of expanding that portfolio into the future. Bookcase has evolved into an editorial board to look after the body of knowledge and the reference curriculum, sponsored jointly by INCOSE, the IEEE Computer Society, and the Systems Engineering Research Council, the CERC. So my job is to lead the editorial board under the overall umbrella of Bookcase to guide and mature those products. The two gentlemen on my left, who I'm sure most of you know, were the architects and leaders of the Bookcase project, so Art Peister and Dave Orwell. So they deserve all of the credit for getting us to where we are now, and they are now taking over as part of the governance body overseeing this project. And my job, along with my fellow editors, is to guide the thing to its next stage. Can I ask how many of you were involved in some way in helping to contribute to the systems engineering body of knowledge, to the Bookcase project? Excellent. Well, give yourselves a round of applause, please. The point is, this is a community effort, and this thing exists because of contributions from the community, and it will continue to evolve and grow because of contributions to the community. How many of the editorial board do we have with us? Okay, 3 or 4, thank you very much. So the editorial board are volunteers who are going to help guide and mature that process, but we are very much continuing to rely on input from the community to make this work. Don't get confused over the names, okay? It's very easy to get yourself confused. Apparently there's a Joe Seabock, who is a professional poker player, who I'm thinking of asking to do a keynote speech in Las Vegas. There's also a famous Eastern European pianist, and I'm sure many others. So Seabock, it just proves my theory that if you put some random characters into Google, you will come up with all kinds of interesting things. We are talking about the guide to the systems engineering body of knowledge. Okay? The CBOC is a guide. It is there to provide a framework of understanding, key concepts and ideas, and then references to the body of knowledge itself. The INCOSE working groups are very much interested in understanding, maturing, and guiding people through the body of knowledge, the vast network of products, information, ideas, approaches that make up systems engineering. So what is the scope of the body of knowledge, and how have we covered that in the CBOK? The CBOK covers systems foundations, system science, system thinking, emergence, complexity, systems methodologies, the underlying systems theories that are the foundation of systems engineering. It covers systems engineering, life cycle and process thinking. What you might think of as traditional systems engineering, life cycle, process, acquisition relationships, through life support, those kinds of things. It also talks about the application of systems engineering to product systems, but also to service and enterprise systems. And it covers some of the newer, emerging, bigger ideas like agile and lean and model-based and system of systems. And if your pet one isn't on that list, that's partly why I'm here. Okay, so the broader scope of cutting-edge systems engineering. The CBOK covers the relationship between the practice of systems engineering and the organizations and teams who enable it and make it happen. So what kind of individuals do we need? What kinds of teams do we need? How do they fit into the organization? We consider that to be part of the body of knowledge for systems engineering. And it covers the relationships between systems engineering and other disciplines, particularly with project and program management, with software engineering, with industrial engineering, with mechanical and electrical engineering, and also with the related specialist domains, with human factors, safety, security, reliability and maintainability. And again, if you're in the etc., that's why we're here to talk to you. The majority of the CBOK is domain independent. It describes systems engineering. Obviously, when we get into service enterprise, there's a flavor of that, but it's still a generic description of systems engineering. The final part of the CBOK are a set of domain-specific case studies. Those case studies are there to help illustrate the rest of the knowledge, but also to bring out domain-specific issues. So if you're in the biomedical domain, or in the transportation domain, or in any of the other interesting new domains that systems engineering is moving into, again, the case studies are the place where potentially you can contribute to the body of knowledge. So the reason I'm here is because we believe that INCOSE working groups already cover all of the knowledge that's in the CBOK, or should. So if you're covering an aspect of systems engineering knowledge that isn't in the CBOK, we need to know about that. I had a very interesting discussion with the new chair of the Natural Systems Working Group, an area that I suspect is touched upon in the CBOK, but not well enough. And that's an emerging discussion that we need to bring into here. So the first thing I want to say, and maybe opening up to comments and questions before I move on to the opportunity that I'm going to give you, is this question. So we believe we've covered the scope of the systems engineering body of knowledge, and we believe that the INCOSE working groups are in the same space and overlapping with us. Does anybody have any questions, observations, challenges to that idea? Anything? What do we think about this idea that the INCOSE working groups are playing in the same space as the CBOK, and that this scope of the body of knowledge that we've captured in the CBOK covers the kind of knowledge we should be looking at? I'll take your silence as agreement. That's great. I mean, I just wondered if anybody thought there was something missing, or that we were talking about a different kind of thing. Bill?
One of the questions I would have is, how do we deal with the diversity of opinion of thought of the content?
Okay, well, I've invited these gentlemen to join me, so why don't I make them do some work? So, Dave, maybe you can explain what we've done in terms of dealing with diversity and different opinions?
Over the last couple of years, there were some knowledge areas where there were competing schools of thought as to how one might approach a topic or best represent what the body of knowledge was. What we tried to do was to give all sides an opportunity to represent the point of views, and then to write a summary article that either stated that we came to consensus on a single point of view, or said that there's many ways to look at it, and here are the major ones, and here's pointers to where the various arguments or approaches are laid out, you be the judge. So we tried not to be dogmatic and say, you must believe this. What we tried to do is say there's a lot of different approaches to it and to fairly represent what they were without necessarily taking sides. Art, would you agree with that?
Yes. Thank you. That's your question, Bill. Yes. Right, thank you. Ian, you have a question.
This isn't on, is it? It doesn't matter. I might have missed it because you went through quite quickly. What about, in terms of potential missing areas, career paths, professionalism, opportunities, and areas that you can professionally develop yourself, including things like certification, but other things are out there as well?
Yes. Art, do you want to? Yes, please.
There is a part of the CBOC, specifically Part 5, that's devoted to the issue of how you insert systems engineering into organizations, into teams, how you grow people, certification, education. So those things are covered in Part 5 of the CBOC. Again, there may be places where it's not covered as well, or there are aspects that are missing. That's the opportunity here, but we tried to create a broad perspective on the things that people do to organize systems engineering and the things that, or companies do to organize systems engineering, and the things that people do as individuals to grow their competency in systems engineering. So it's included.
Yeah, that's because I knew it used to be in Part 5, but I haven't seen it recently, so I didn't know whether
It's still there.
Yep. Right. Thank you, Ian. Question in the middle here. Just stand up, sir. I'm not sure that it is, and that's probably one of the interesting challenges is how do we deal with that sort of question. So I don't think that what are the system challenges that we need technology to step up to, and how do we deal with some of those other issues. I'm not sure that is covered, and that might be an interesting one to reflect on going forward. Anything else? Yes, sorry. Yes and yes. And I think part of the reason for asking this question is I think thinking about what working groups we have and what those working groups are doing helps bound and understand what the body of knowledge should be and whether the CBOC should be covering it. And in the same way that Ian was asking whether the body of knowledge includes how people and individuals and organisations develop themselves, mechanisms for using the CBOC to spread understanding and stimulate discussion and debate in what systems engineering is one of the reasons that INCOSE is supporting it, and that we would absolutely be happy to work with your working group to develop that kind of thing. Yes, sir.
Tell me if the question's off
That's an easy one. Okay, CBOC is publicly available to everybody. Under the bookcase project was funded by some sponsors, and that part of that funding was that the CBOC would be made publicly available to anybody who wants to view it. Okay, and the agreement we have with INCOSE, IEEE, and the CERC is that they will host the CBOC, they will support the editorial board in its first few years, and they will make the CBOC publicly available to everybody. The extent to which we can leverage off of that with things like maybe training, maybe other products, is part of the reason that INCOSE are doing it. But the CBOC itself is and will remain publicly available to anybody who wants to look at it. And although I'm here talking to INCOSE working groups today, the editorial board spans more than INCOSE, and I'm very much hoping, well, I need the authoring and reviewing contributing community to span more than INCOSE. So INCOSE is a critical part of this, and we are in a position where the more that INCOSE steps up now, the more that INCOSE will be the significant player in this activity. But there are other people who are also interested, involved in this work, and that's part of my remit, is to connect that broader community together and use this as a way of bringing systems engineering together. So absolutely, sir, yes.
I'm sorry, I just walked in and this may be off topic, but I was told that there was a limit on the number of words or something on each topic in CBOC. Is that correct? Because I find, at least in the sections I looked at, that there is some confusion, and it may be due to the fact that it was limited to so many. And how does one, can one input into it, or how does one improve that?
Number of questions there. Yes, fundamentally, because the CBOC is a guide to the body of knowledge, we did not want it to become an encyclopedia, a handbook, a repository of the knowledge itself. So in order to make sure we kept the guide concise and readable, each article is limited to a number of words and a set of references. We can expand the number of articles and the structure to cover the breadth of the knowledge. I was struck by John Thomas's analogy yesterday at the plenary to different kinds of boats. Okay, so the CBOC we've created is more than a rowboat, but it's not yet a luxury ocean liner. So we know that some of the content of the CBOC needs to be improved and matured to completely fulfill its remit. And the reason I'm talking to you today is we want the INCOSE working groups to help us make those improvements. So I'm not sure if the word count is the thing that leads to some of the sections not being everything we might want them to be. I think the reason for that is that there's still work to do to refine and describe the concepts. And the word limit is to make sure that the sections of the CBOC are digestible by people who want to navigate through it.
So are you still entertaining inputs from?
Yes, absolutely.
And what are the guidelines for those?
Okay, I can move on to that now. I have two parts. I wanted to stop and have that discussion, and unless there are any more questions,
Can I just
Dave, yes.
add a comment on that?
Yes, of course you can.
So we wanted to avoid the temptation to have original content in the CBOC, because at that point it doesn't become a guide to the existing body of knowledge, it becomes the place where new knowledge was put in. And we said that that was out of scope. So if there was knowledge if somebody came up to us and said, hey, I've got this new thing that hasn't been published, I'd like to put it in the CBOC, we asked them to get it published first, peer-reviewed, and then we would refer to it as something that's part of the existing body of knowledge. And that, underneath that constraint, we thought 2,000 words or so was enough to describe what had already been published and to point people to it without being the repository for original content. And that, there was a tension there, but that's what we were thinking about.
Okay, that's probably a good point to move on to the second part of what I want to say to you. The reason I wanted to stop there and have that brief discussion is this is the sort of interaction we want to have with the working groups. Is my area of interest covered and where? How well is my area of interest covered? What might our working group do to make it better? If my area of interest isn't covered, how can we get it in? So that kind of discussion is what we want to have with the working groups. The mechanics of doing that and the way we're going to engage is the second part of what I want to talk about. So I hope you can see that the CBOC covers a lot of what you guys are doing, and where it doesn't, it can do, and that's what we want you to help us to do. So I'm here to present you with an opportunity or issue you with a challenge, whichever of those form of words you're more comfortable with. We are looking for INCOSE working groups to engage with the CBOC from now going forward. And really, we want you to engage in one of three ways, or my challenge to you is to consider engaging in one of three ways. There's a brief discussion and a little bit of context of what we would like the working groups to consider. Some of you got a copy of this. We ran out of copies, so before you leave here, are the rest arrived yet? Okay, we will make, there are more copies. If you haven't got a copy of this and you're interested in thinking about this challenge, please make sure you leave with this piece of paper so you can take it into your working groups and work with it.
I came across a formatting issue. Once we get that resolved, I'll send that out on the TechOps reflector.
Thank you very much. Okay, so for the purpose of this initial engagement, I want you to think about the CBOC in one of three ways. The purpose of this is to get you to look at the CBOC and consider interacting with it, and to do it initially within the framework of your working groups. Although there is no problem with individual members who want to interact with the CBOC considering doing that. But in the first instance, I want to try and harness and connect to the power of the working groups, because I think that will be a big step forward. So for now, I'd like you to think of the engagement in one of three ways. There is no reason you can't think of the engagement any way you like in the future and come back to me with some suggestions and ideas, but I want you to start from here. So I'd like you to ask these questions from the perspective of your working group or your area of interest or your particular concern within the general body of knowledge. Are there parts of the CBOC as it currently exists, as this gentleman here I think is suggesting, which your working group could help us in improving or expanding, in editing the current text, in adding concepts and ideas within the existing structure, in updating or providing additional references or information? So can you help us improve what we've already got within constraints and the structure we've written it? Secondly, are there areas of knowledge, like natural systems, where there isn't currently coverage in the CBOC, but your working group has developed ideas which are mature enough that they could and should be in there? So the CBOC has to have knowledge with a certain amount of maturity, knowledge which is, as Dave says, we're not looking for necessarily the one definitive answer, and if there's variety of thought, we'd like to know about that, but we're looking for knowledge which is mature enough, published and socialized, and can be generally accepted as part of the body of knowledge. Exactly what does that mean? Well, that's the editorial board's job, working with you to help figure out. But do you have things that you've produced or knowledge you understand or references and ideas that could be used to create new articles or new sections to expand the CBOC to more richly and completely cover the body of knowledge? And would you be willing to help us generate new articles to go in the CBOC in that area? And the third, and probably the interesting one from the point of view of those of us who volunteer to get involved in working groups, is are there areas of the knowledge which are not yet quite mature enough to go in the CBOC? Natural systems, again, may be a good example. You guys are starting a working group, you're starting to think about it. What products, what ideas, what discussions, what activities will you be doing to mature and evolve the knowledge in that area? And can you consider the CBOC as a target for that knowledge to help guide the way you're doing it, such that this time next year you'll be in the position to answer question 2 maybe? And what we would like you to do this week is to report on your answers to those questions as part of the Working Group Bazaar at the end of the week. So Bill and I would like a snapshot of which working groups think they can help edit the CBOC and would be like to try, which think that they can provide new knowledge, which of them think that they are starting to include in their plans targeting the CBOC as part of their maturity, okay? Now, I'm absolutely aware that working groups have their own plans and agendas and come here to get things done. And I'm also very aware that many of you have been spending significant time helping with the INCOSE handbook. So if your answer on Tuesday is, we hear the question, we are interested, and we will include it in our plans going forward, that's fabulous. If your answer is, actually, we think we can help and there are some things we can start doing, that's even more fabulous. If your answer is, as some of you are, and I'll point out the guilty in a moment, that you're already doing this and you're going to continue to do it and you'd like to engage with the new editorial board to do it better, that's fabulous beyond words, okay? So that's my challenge to you. The reason I'm standing up here this morning is you to think about these questions and engaging. In terms of the answer of how do you engage, well, we have an editorial board, we have a collection of editors who have been assigned sections of the CBOC. If you know which bit you want to change, one of those editors will work with you to help collect your contributions, get it in the right format, and get it put into the CBOC at some appropriate time in the future. So that's the basic answer to your question, sir. But yes?
Sorry to interrupt. What about chapters? You're not asking for input from chapters?
I'm going to be asking for input from everybody. But here this week at the international workshop in this room, I'm asking for input from working groups. But yes, as part of my campaign to get as broad a community as possible, and if some of you are here representing chapters and would like to talk to us about chapter involvement, that would be fabulous. But I'm overusing fabulous now. Here, I'm engaging with working groups, sir, okay? But thank you for your question. So, the mechanism we can explain to you, but basically the mechanism is get in touch with us, tell us what area you're interested in helping to mature. We will allocate one of our editors to help you do that, and you can then get involved in the mechanics of actually getting material into the CBOC. And there is a process and guidance and help for doing that, and we'd be delighted to work with you to help you get there, okay? So that's the second part of what I want to talk about. Any thoughts or responses or questions on this challenge? Bill?
Yeah, sorry, just a little bit of sideways, is that one of the additional challenges I posed to working groups yesterday was also looking at how can you engage with chapters. Now, we have some working groups that are chapters focused or chapter centric, like the Model Concept Engineering group. The architecture group de facto is primarily a UK chapter activity. Power and Energy group, as it's currently constituted, is really centered around the Cleveland chapter. But there, again, one of the additional challenges I posed was how to do that. If we can do that in the context of CBOC, that's great also.
Okay, so I'm here today to challenge those of you who are here to get involved in working group activities to think about these three questions. Anybody got any questions or clarifications or thoughts on that? Yes?
You talk about articles and references. What about webinars and things that are available on the internet, like TED Talks, for example, things that are multimedia, and how do you treat that?
Currently, we don't, but I didn't want to turn this into a CBOC tutorial. I haven't launched into what is the CBOC, how does it work, what does it look like. I'm kind of either assuming you know, or I'm piquing your interest enough to go and have a look. The CBOC is an electronic format. It's based on a wiki engine. It's a series of interlinking articles. There is no reason within that structure we can't have those kind of multimedia content if appropriate. And part of our discussion as an editorial board is what do we do to move in that direction. So if that's part of the engagement, to use some of the other formats in which the body of knowledge is described, we've created a living and electronic environment in which that would be absolutely feasible. But we had enough problems, to be honest, putting text in. So again, we're not a super tanker yet, but we certainly would be interested in ideas that take us in that direction. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Any other questions or thoughts on this challenge? Yes.
Yeah, which editorial
I'm not sure, but if you on Tuesday put that in your plan and feed that back to me, one of the first things I will do is go away with the editorial board and figure out who's offered what and who we can get to work with you. Something that's explained in my note and I didn't say is that we've formed up an editorial board. We have a very good cross-section of knowledge and experience, but we don't have a complete one yet. There are still areas of the CBOC that we don't have editors for, and there are still areas of the community who I don't have representation of. So it could be that if we take your example, when we look at that, we think, actually, we don't have an editor who really could do training. And one of the things I've asked the working groups to do is to consider whether there's someone in your working group who might be interested in taking on that challenge, or there's somebody you know who might make a good editor who could fit into that area. So growing the editorial board is part of, and we have several people from working groups who are already on the editorial board. So Judith and yeah, lots of you. I won't try and pick all of you out, I'll get you wrong, but many of the editors are part of that community, and that's why we've chosen them. But equally, we do have gaps. So I'll either assign you an editor, John, or I'll ask you to help me find one, is the short answer to your question.
I wasn't looking for an editor of the training area.
Yes.
I was looking for an overall coordinator who would help organize the webinars for all.
Well, in that case, that's me. In terms of organizing that larger thing, that's me. Yeah, so the editors are assigned a particular area of knowledge, and they're there because of their expertise, but there are a number of the editors who are also helping me coordinate the whole thing. So that will be my job to either do that or find someone to help you with it. I was going to go on and talk about some of the ways that working groups are currently interacting with the CBOC, but I'll do that unless there are any other thoughts or questions on this general idea. Yes.
You may want to ask for help on case studies for part 7
Yes.
CBOC.
Yes, I think, again, I didn't want to read out everything I've written. The reason I've wrote a couple of pages is to give you something to go away and think about. But as I said earlier, part 7 of the CBOC is case studies, and that's where we want to get the richness of broader ideas. That's where some of the multimedia stuff might first come in, and in particular, some of the domain-specific interpretations. So case studies, I think, might be one of the areas where working groups might particularly be interested in interacting. But how you want to interact is really up to you. That's part of what I want you to think about and get back to us on. Are there any other questions or thoughts or comments on this idea of the working groups going away and thinking about these issues? Okay, well, to help stimulate your thinking, this is not an exclusive list. This is off the top of my head to give a flavor of what we've been doing with some of the working groups. So there are existing INCOSE working groups who are already working closely with the CBOC. I can talk about a couple of these, and I know some of the working group chairs are in the room, so if you want to add to this, then please do. The System Science Working Group has been a very interesting collaboration. When we first came to the CBOC, we wanted to put system science, the system foundations of systems engineering, into the body of knowledge. We didn't want to write a guide to system science because that's not our area. We wanted to write a guide to what systems engineers should know about system science. When I came to look for that, I found that while there were lots of things written about this, there wasn't a concise, digestible, simple answer to that question. And not only that, but the system science community were intrigued by the question. The idea of explaining and bounding part of the richness of what they do in a way that it would be applicable as a foundation to systems engineering. So we've been working with the System Science Working Group to create the initial content in the CBOC, but also to start to do this synthesis of knowledge to create a better understanding of what the foundations are and to create new original material outside of the CBOC, and for that material to then be referenced and briefly summarized within the CBOC. And that's been a very interesting journey. James, is there anything you want to add to that discussion?
Yeah, one thing thing we found was, like you said, the system science community is kind of fragmented, and we partnered with the International Society of System Sciences, and notice the name of it, it's System Sciences, plural, so they couldn't even agree that there's a single science about systems. So it's kind of just representative of the fragmentation. So we have people from ISSS who come to our workshops, and we continue to have things to figure out about. They're trying to figure out what system engineering is so they can tell us how it applies, and we're trying to figure out what systems. So we're trying to figure out each other.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how we're running into some of the culture clashes between the engineering world and the science world, just in our attempt at dialogue. So it's a very interesting journey we're going through, and I hope we got I think a pretty good cut in the CBOC now, but we know it's kind of early, and we actually extracted and condensed a lot of that and put a section in the SE handbook,
Yes.
which is a nice offshoot of that, because the handbook said nothing about system science or system thinking before.
Thank you very much, James. I think that's a good example of the way that working on the CBOC has had real value for the working group. So I'm asking you to help me, but I think there's a lot of value in working groups getting involved in this, because it's been a real stimulus for the working group's effort. And this external collaboration, this working with others, is, I think, a particularly good theme, that the CBOC can be a place to help us do that. So certainly, I mean, I've been involved in that working group, and I think it's been a real stimulus to the way the working group has been able to help its plans and go forward. Judith, do you want to just say something about what you've been doing with the System of Systems and Enterprise sections?
Sure.
I think there's a microphone behind you, if that will help.
We're a relatively new working group, and so we've been working on the CBOC at the same time as the working group was formed. And so we actually have, as part of our charter, to basically provide input and serve basically as a professional resource for a variety of areas, including the CBOC. In the last update of the CBOC, one of the things our working group did was a survey of recommended references by working group participants for others who are interested in System of Systems. And based on that reference survey, the top references, we use those to feed them back into the CBOC reference list. And it's an example, I think, of the gentleman who asked the question about how when you've got an area that is still emerging and forming, where you want to put things in CBOC that are things people fairly well agree on, but then indicate areas where there's still an ongoing discussion and the community is working on. And we really see the working group as things emerge and develop in System of Systems. We're hoping the working group plays a large role in that, and so it's just logical to have the working group then feed that into the CBOC sections on both System of Systems as well as Enterprise, which is closely related to the area.
Thank you very much. And can you just, because I know you're again collaborating with a number of other groups, so who is your working group working with outside of INCOSE?
There were a couple of areas. One, we worked pretty closely with the T-Area SOS group, which was a European Union funded project to develop a research agenda in System of Systems. And the National Defense Industry Association has a System of Systems working group, and we've been working collaboratively with them as well. And that's another group, as an editor on the CBOC associate editorial group, I'll be reaching out to. Because it's an emerging area, also we had a meeting yesterday with the chapters and discussion about how identifying chapters with interests in working group topics. And that led me to the idea that for the CBOC update, reaching out to those chapters that have indicated an interest in System of Systems as another place for input to CBOC is a really good resource for the CBOC editors, and other editors might want to think about that as well.
Thank you very much. I think the idea of the CBOC acting as a catalyst for INCOSE working groups, playing a leadership role in emerging areas of systems engineering, is almost so fabulous that I'm beyond words. So I think that's a real synergy for all of us. So thank you for that. I've put knowledge management here. One of the questions we often get asked is what's the relationship between CBOC and the INCOSE handbook? In the short term, the answer is that the INCOSE handbook version 3 was a major input to the CBOC, and many of the people working on the CBOC were also working on the handbook. As James has mentioned, some of the ways that we slightly broadened the scope of what we meant by systems engineering knowledge in the CBOC have found their way back into the handbook. So version 4 of the handbook has a short chapter on systems thinking, which is directly a result of the thinking and working from the CBOC. So in the short term, the INCOSE handbook and the CBOC are very closely aligned and relate to each other. In the longer term, I see the two things co-evolving, and we're not really quite sure what they might look like in 3 or 4 or 5 years. But we are working closely with that knowledge management group, again, to make sure that it's a deliberate and thought through development and not either a rivalry or an argument or an accidental development. So if you're developing things that are outside of the CBOC that are parallel or related that we could make sure we understand the relationship to, that's a particularly strong area, I think. The last one I've got on my list, and then we might have a few minutes for anybody else who has any thoughts, is the work that the security working group is doing. Rick, I think I see you at the back there. Would you give us a brief overview of your proposal for the way that your working group plans to interact with the CBOC?
Our working group has decided to take on the maintenance responsibility for the security section, or at least to be a contributor in that area. And one of the first questions that became very obvious as needing an answer is, what's the concept of operations for the maintenance activity? Or put another way, what are the criteria? If we're going to recommend references, why do they belong on a list? Why don't they? And our concern is that we had people with many different ideas as to what should be on that list and how many pieces should be on that list. And then we understood that IEEE was going to play a role as well. And what we didn't want is to see a wiki page that got thrashed left and right and never converged on anything. So we wrote a white paper that basically tried to establish what's this job all about, maintaining the CBOC section on security, what qualifies as something that ought to be there versus something that shouldn't ought to be there, what kind of scope and breadth, and very specifically for us, there is the concern that we need to write to system engineers, not to security engineers. And yet, in our working group, there's a tendency for lots of strong people in the security area to think it's all about the security detail. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And again, I think that's a really good example of an area that is part of the systems engineering body of knowledge, but has a life and extension outside, using the CBOC interaction to try and really get a handle on what part of security and systems engineering overlap and how they relate to each other. And as we've seen with systems science, I think the security community will learn something from that, as well as the INCOSE community benefiting. And I think it makes systems engineering and INCOSE look good to be involved in these sorts of interactions and to use the body of knowledge to drive that forward. And I think that's one of the most exciting parts of this job, is to be helping this community evolve the knowledge, not simply trying to capture it and pin it down. And I'm very excited about working with all of you to do that. I think that somebody had their hand up. Yes. Can you stand up? Can you stand up, please?
Could you use the microphone?
I want to know what your approach is to, the less mature fields and the fast-moving fields like system science. As you know, there are, I'm working with Singapore, for instance, on system thinking, and their views are quite different. They think systems thinking is part of holistic thinking, and, they have critical things. So what I'm getting at is, in an emerging field like system science, some people may argue it's not an emerging field. What are you doing in CBOC? Are you going to have 6-monthly updates to those particular areas? And are you making sure that you give an objective view of these less mature fields?
Yes. The simple answer is that, indeed, the CBOC will have a 6-monthly update. What goes in the update will depend upon the editors and their interaction with the working groups and whoever else. So there is currently, Judith and her System of Systems group have updates and ideas which they're working on for the CBOC, which may find their way into the May update, or they may wait for the October update. But there will be a twice-yearly opportunity for communities to update the material in the CBOC with whatever they think is the most relevant and mature material. The second part of your question is more difficult. When does something become mature enough that it needs to be described and referenced in the CBOC? And where does the debate and diverging ideas and discussion go before it finds its way into the CBOC? And that, again, is going to be part of the judgment of the community and of the editors. We have a thing called the CBOC Sandbox, which is roll back a second. The CBOC itself is housed in a wiki engine and looks like a wiki, but it is not open and live. So you can't go into the CBOC and edit it. It's there to be structured and organized, but it's not like Wikipedia. It is updated twice a year with the control management of the editors working with the working groups and the authors. The Sandbox is a place where those communities can go to put in ideas and try out things and discuss where the knowledge might be going. And it's not part of the formal body of knowledge, but it is emerging work which is being discussed to go into the body of knowledge. So we've started that process. I think the question of where these broader discussions go and where the cutoff is between the CBOC and the kind of community discussion that the working groups have anyway is a really interesting one. Not everything needs to go in here. Some things will continue to go in conference papers and panels and forums and discussions. It's part of our job to find it and track it and bring it into the body of knowledge as appropriate and keep this thing updated and mature so it reflects best thinking and is tracking future thinking. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just want to clarify that what I'm concerned about is that we're not just relying on inputs. There is both the push and the pull. What I would like to see is that in these fast-moving fields, you make a conscious effort, regardless of inputs,
Yes,
to update them.
absolutely. Yes. And I guess part of the reason to be here is if there's a fast-moving area, I would expect INCOSE to have a working group on it. I would be surprised if they didn't. And part of Bill's job is to find those areas and make sure there is a working group. And that is part of our job working with INCOSE, is to be connected with that technical material and to be finding them and bringing them into our community. I think the CBOC provides us another mechanism for having that discussion. So if there's something that isn't represented and we know there's a community out there, connecting with them is certainly part of my job, absolutely. And I'm not sitting back waiting for people to come to me with content. So that's a very good point. Thank you for that. Okay, we're almost out of time. Is there anything else? The mechanics of this Sandbox provides an environment for people to comment and contribute and work with the editorial board. There are guides, there is training. If any of the working groups meeting this week would like a little bit of a tutorial or a discussion on this, then please contact me and we'll come and talk to you. The mechanics of this is a whole nother meeting, but we do have a process and guidance and help to help you help us generate and update the CBOC. Thank you. All right, can I give you one last reminder? What we would, not as all the engagement, but as a particular part of what I'm looking to do with you guys, we would very much like to see some thoughts or answers to these questions in the material you present at the working group bazaar on Tuesday. So I would like, ideally every working group to give me some answer to these questions, even if it's, thank you for asking, we'll get back to you next year. And that's part of having Bill here. He tells me he's not interested in morale, just in results. So we would like you to do that. Yes. Yeah. There are more paper copies of this floating around. Please take one, but we will make sure that this is on the reflector. My contact details are on here. If anybody would like me to come and pop into their working group, show them the sandbox, talk a little bit more, I will try to do that. And, I will be going around with a glass of wine on Tuesday, looking for the answers to these questions and hoping to find them. Thank you for coming, and thank you for everybody's comments and contributions, and I look forward to working with all of you in the future. Thank you very much.